what is the equivalent of like Turing completeness for intelligence? Like when you look at a computer, you can ask, hey, is it Turing complete or not? If it is, it can compute anything. If it's not, it can't. And this is a very widespread, well understood notion in the field of computer science and such. And so that's sharp. And you can ask, is there something like that for intelligence? And you can ask questions like, hey, if that's the most powerful kind of computational system, at least in some sense, there's like quantum theory and other things that are maybe interesting to discuss about like what are the limits of computation, and like does Turing completeness actually tell you that much about it, or why is Turing completeness a thing? David Deutsch would say it's because of physics that tells you what the world can compute. It's not a computer science question; it's a physics question. So anyway, there's stuff down that path that's interesting. But from a AGI perspective, I think I'm just like grabbing the nearest powerful concept and saying, hey, if Turing completeness seems to be the thing, I'll focus on that and let other people figure out if that's wrong. But anyway, so what is the equivalent of Turing completeness for the brain? What makes you AGI complete? What does that mean? And the idea for that I've been playing with in my head has been Popper completeness, which has a few levels to it. And the first is to say that, okay, you do want Turing completeness. That's sort of the first thing that you want, because Turing completeness allows you to compute anything. If you think that ideas are computations, then you want to be able to master any computation, compute anything. So that's the first thing you want. But because everything around you is Turing complete, basically, every computer is Turing complete, obviously they're not really doing anything intelligent, most of them. So Turing completeness isn't enough. So what else do you need to make up this, we'll call it Popper completeness, that's the top shelf of intelligence? What else do you need? And so I think the first thing that you need is to say, one limitation of Turing machines is that they can compute any given program, but the programs that we're interested in aren't given. You have to make them. There's no programmer external to humanity to give us the programs that we want, the ideas that we want. We got to come up with them. So you need a system that can't just run anything, but can generate anything. So this is sort of a generative universality. And we can kind of talk about what that might involve, something like a random program generator. It would be a simple thing that, like, if it can just generate randomly any program, then okay, that would satisfy this requirement. So you want to be able to compute anything, generate anything, but then also you want to be able to do a third thing, which is to control what you have made. And if you were to think in sort of a biological version of this, it would be like, I want to be able to do Darwin's variation and selection. So I want to be able to come up with new stuff, new mutations, but then I also want to be able to like kill the stuff that it sucks. And more generally, I just want to be able to control it. I want to say, like, if it's good, I want to use it a lot. And if it's bad, I want to use it less. Maybe that means killing it and destroying it. Or maybe not. Maybe you just put that in the back corner of your storage shed. And it still exists technically. You haven't killed it, but it's not really affecting very much. And that's okay too. So you can stick the bad ideas somewhere where, again, technically they exist, but they're not really affecting what you do. So zooming out here, where the general question is there something like Turing completeness for intelligence? Top shelf, if you have this, that's the best you can do. And, that starts with Turing completeness, but then adds this generative aspect. I want it to be able to generate anything and also control or select anything. And so the idea then is like, or the question I'm asking now is like, is that enough? If you have a thing which can compute anything, generate anything, and control anything that it makes, do you then have a human? Do you then have an AGI? Do you have a thing that can discover anything? Or is this too broad and abstract and useless a definition? So that's what I'm kind of playing with now. And I have some ideas kind of pushing either way in that question, that it's, this is enough or this isn't enough. But to start off with, we can just kind of toss around the idea for now and see what you guys think.
So just listening to that, I think I always go back to, like, I think all the pieces are almost there, even just in LLMs, except that last bit of selection, of being able to discern um, what stuff is good and what stuff is bad, like outside of that also being influenced by the training data, right? Like, because you want new, original, good or bad stuff. Um, like, I think if basically if you buy that, okay, these are like quote unquote probabilistic machines, they can output any sequence of tokens. So then you are satisfying the criteria of like it can generate anything. And I think it just kind of boils down to, okay, how do we know that some idea is good and another idea is bad? It just feels like this is like this definitionless thing that is just very hard to put in a program of some kind. So then the LLM can be like, okay, keep churning out a bunch of ideas, and then, oh, this idea is good. I'm gonna like do more with this idea. Just that the reason that's not possible is that LLMs have no like sense of their own of like, okay, what's good, what's bad. It's just like, oh, this is good in the training data, so this is good, and it doesn't work.
One thing to inject there is to say that when it comes to control, I think there are like two sides to it. One of them is the criteria you're using to make your decision about what is good and what is bad, or relevant or irrelevant. Secondly, there's the sort of enforcement mechanisms that you have. In evolution, like if you eat something, or just like that when somebody doesn't get selected to have a mate and reproduce, these are all different enforcement mechanisms for, you were too slow, you got eaten, you were too unfit and small and scrawny, you didn't have a mate. Or in the case of a mind, maybe it's oh, this thing happened, and now the entire brain got sent a signal saying stop what you're
Right.
doing, change directions. And if there was no information superhighway in the brain to send a message to every part of the brain, then you could just never exert that form of control. You would just have a little idea in the corner of the brain, and it couldn't ever affect very much. So these are the two sides of the coin.
But it seems like if we had like LLMs with the with the with the criteria of what is good or bad, it would be like dangerous because it's subjective what is good and bad. So like if you had LLMs with the criteria of what is good and bad, it came from a person, only from one person. It's not like it doesn't have the ability to either like know for its own mind, um, for its own like whether it's good or bad, because they are the same.
So a lot of the things that are in a neural network are going to come from the training, and you could say that those are human dependent because the data that they're being fed is from humans. You could also say that the criteria, the objective function that's being used to train the whole neural network, that was set by a human, and it never changes during the process of training. So those are all human level things. But I think that the primary problem with neural networks isn't so much that they're human, they're too influenced by humans. Humans are influenced by humans, and that's fine. The more important thing I think is about this universality and the idea that you can figure out anything. And in the case of neural networks, one problem might be that if sort of the primary thing that's driving the whole system, the outer loop, the objective function, if that is wrong in some way or weak in some way, then like the training process will never correct it. So and you want the ideal mind, I think is one where any error in it can be corrected. There isn't just one core thing at the center or the outer loop that is just fixed.
Yeah.
But
I guess
just to say one more thing there, just as a general point, I think this issue of seeing like what is the problem with LLMs is in some ways like the question that everybody's asking, and there are like different answers to it. Oh, it's not symbolic, or it's too many human ideas have been built with it and needs to be freed from those, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or LLMs can't produce knowledge, which is what some people might say more in the Deutschian circles. So, but the boundary, it reminds me of like Popper's quest for like, what is the criterion of demarcation between like philosophy and science or something, where it's like, there seems to be a difference here, but where do you draw the line? What is the real important difference? And I think that's still what's very open for discussion. And I think that's where we'll all probably disagree a little bit.
Right. I think to even like move away from LLMs a little bit, I guess the kind of thing I'm talking about when I mean like to discern what it means when an idea is good or bad. It's like, that famous story about Einstein having what he says was the best idea he ever had was the guy falling from a building and realizing that he would be weightless. Like, there must have been some mechanism in Einstein's brains and everyone else's brain that when he had that idea, some wave went throughout his whole brain of like, this idea is super deep. It connects to all of these problems that I've been thinking of. This is a fantastic idea. I need to like spend a whole bunch of resources focusing on it and developing it more. That mechanism or thing didn't happen for, countless other ideas that he probably had in the weeks, months, years before. And I guess the thing I'm getting at here right now in this conversation is like, okay, I think this mechanism or whatever it is must be some big piece of the puzzle for this AGI stuff. Like, I think I think before we had LLMs, it was like, man, even producing ideas that even could make sense, like that just weren't random strings, was kind of pretty difficult. But now with LLMs, it's like, okay, they produce a bunch of ideas and most of them are right. Some of them are wrong. I mean, depending on the training data, blah, blah, blah. But I think, yeah, it's still like, okay, what is this mechanism, this mysterious mechanism that with humans, when you have a good idea, you can sort of tell that this is a really good idea, that this is solving some big fundamental problem. And with LLMs, you can't. And something that I've heard mentioned that I don't know anything about, so I don't know if it's productive bringing it up, but I'll bring it up so that I can remind myself to read a paper for maybe next week or the week after, is this, like Jan LeCun talks about this thing. It's called the free energy principle and energy-based models. I think this guy named Carl Friston came up with this concept. And the idea is that like good explanations or good ideas are like low energy, and bad explanations and bad ideas or whatever are high energy. And it's like a borrowed term from physics of like unstable systems are high energy and stable systems are low energy, and trying to kind of apply that to intelligence and information processing. And I guess I basically wonder if like, okay, this might be one way to at least try and attack the problem of like, okay, how do you detect a good idea that's solving a lot of problems versus a bad one?
I'm pretty skeptical of that stuff, but I'd be curious to see if you find something interesting there, and then we can hash it out. One thing to be said there in terms of the stability of ideas is that something can be stable just due to like the current situation of ideas, rather than like its intrinsic nature. And so, a religious idea might be very stable in a certain kind of culture and then very unstable outside that culture. And so it's not intrinsically a stable thing. So that's one case where if you were to take this energy-based perspective and, maybe if it was naively applied, you'd say, this must be true because it's so stable for various reasons. But that'd be wrong. One side note, by the way, in terms of thinking about this idea of, okay, you have some notion of what's good, and then there's a separate thing of like, how do you take the good ideas and sort of make them win, make them affect everything? Like, oh, you said that, that's great. I'm going to print that. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to build on that. I'm going to publish that. What is the connection between those two things of recognizing the good and then sort of acting on that? These are two very separate things. The funny example I like to say sometimes is like, imagine that you separated those two things in the biosphere so that a lion correctly was able to chase down a slow gazelle. And then instead of doing the usual thing and eating it, it just was like, okay, tag, you're it, touch football. This is not for real. Keep on going and I won't eat you. And then, the system would never be, the slow gazelles would never get weeded out. And so there would be no pressure to be fast. So logically, these are separate things, recognizing the quality and then doing something about it. So that's a general thing. And one kind of fun domain to test these ideas out or to apply them to is, or just see how they work, is like your own writing. I like to write. I have my web of notes. I use this thing called Roam Research. And so, it's a bunch of notes, text files connected, and there's other apps that do that. But it's fun to see how that system if you were to sort of zoom out and just see what happens in it, you see, oh, new notes are getting added, removed, edited, connected, disconnected. And there's this sort of thing happening there as I work on them. And it's not, I'm sure in many ways it's very different from how the mind works. But in some ways, it's, there's something going on there. That there is some structure in my head that's being reflected on the paper. And when it doesn't reflect what's in my head, I change it. That's a wrong sentence. That's not a real connection. Let me get rid of it. So when you ask the question, let's say, so all that is to say that like looking at this set of notes, text files and how they're connected is maybe an interesting model for the mind. Not a perfect model. All models are wrong, I guess, but it's kind of a fun one. And it's so visual and simple, just text files and connections. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing too highfalutin. There's no category theory here. It's very down to earth. And so you can just see that, for instance, when we ask a particular question now of that model, like, okay, hey, we just talked about what happens when you see an idea and you think it's good. And then you want to make that affect what you do next in a big way. And like, you don't forget it. Einstein says that was really good. I'm going to work on that. What you would then see in the case of the notes is, hey, like that idea got written down, and then like other stuff started connecting to that idea, or that idea was placed at a note which was already very highly visited. It's like putting it on the front page of Google. Like a lot of things are happening there. Mm-hmm. So if you want it to get seen by a lot of people or seen by yourself in a big way, you put it where it's going to be seen. There's a difference between like putting it on you erase everything on your blackboard and you just fill it up with that one idea. So these are different ways of making that thing causally big, not maybe physically big, but you wrote that little note in the right place where it's going to have a big effect, and that's what you want. And so the note example is just one way of thinking about how that plays out, on paper or in a little hyperlinked set of notes. In the brain, the specific mechanics are presumably, very different. Certain neurons, getting highly activated, and I don't know. The neuroscientists can come in and say what happens, but something is achieving this effect of making that idea stick and have effects. And other ideas, which were thought of before and after, and sounded very similar, all got forgotten or just put in the shelf of BS that doesn't matter. So that's interesting. Both how you made that assessment, but then what you did after having made that assessment of this idea is good.
I think all of it has to be a bit open-ended. So you want to be able to do lots of different types of things to select something or to determine if it's actually a valuable thing. So I like to break it down into 5 parts. This is what David Deutsch does too. Instead of variation and selection alone, it starts with a problem. Then you have the guessing or the variations. Then you have alternatives. And then you have the selection between those alternatives. And then after that, you have progress or whatever you determine as progress. And that would mean more problems. And each of those they all have different criteria for what is considered a problem to start, what is considered a solution to that problem to start, what is considered an alternative to that solution, what is considered the way to select the best alternative of those solutions, and then what do you consider to be progress after you've picked the best alternative. And I think that all of those, to have something that can open-endedly create knowledge, all of those have to be open-ended, like the criteria for what is considered a problem or a guess or an alternative and so on. All of that has to be open-ended. I think that's my.
What do you mean by open-ended?
Like it can be changed or it can be replaced by a different criteria. So you might think of what was considered a problem yesterday might not meet the criteria of what we think of a problem is today. Or, or in the future, we might think of things as problems that we don't think of today as problems.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that's like another example would be like you train a robot to just walk, and the objective function is just walk, and if it's maximizing that, it'll walk really good but not do anything else, versus kind of train a Minecraft agent to just do anything in Minecraft and it'll start like building houses and making farms and all that. It's like there's no end to what you could do versus there kind of is an end to what you can do and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I think if any one of those things are set, then you can't have open-ended progress. Maybe that's just what I'm guessing here.
Yeah, I think the general discussion of open-endedness is as the opposite of being goal-directed, where there's like a specific endpoint you're looking for, and you're just trying to get to that. That is a process which, if you reach that goal, then you stop. So you want the open-ended process not to stop. So there's no end. But B, also, you may not have like a particular direction in mind, no particular goal. So it's more exploration. And so instead of, if you're in a flat plane, a big, universe to explore, you're not trying to reach a particular point, but try to find whatever is good in this space. And it may be an infinite space. And ideally that's in our world, we hope it's infinite. But that's the general idea of open-endedness. And there's versions of it that are applied in machine learning where people are like, hey, like we make all these algorithms that are meant to attack a very specific goal, achieve this one task of predicting X, Y, or Z, or whatever it is. But what if we didn't have that? What would we do then? Is that interesting? And so that's kind of one of these side quests or non-mainstream forms of research. Like, hey,
yeah,
we're all goal-directed, but let's try not to be.
I want to throw a little bit in there because what you're saying is about goal-directedness and essentially what is the solution. But I think we can also change the criteria for what we consider problems. So that itself could be open-ended. What is a problem? Or what are the things that are selections? Like what is the selection criteria? That could also be open-ended. And I think that's separate from the end goal being open-ended. So I think that each step of the process could be open-ended also.
This brings me to, or if you want to add to that, Ali.
No, go for it. Do your thing.
I was going to say that this brings me back to this idea of Popper completeness and saying, okay, like what is the definition, or what would we count as AGI? What is the equivalent of Turing completeness? What is the top shelf for intelligence? And so when you talk about open-endedness, every stage of this discovery process, both in terms of how you come up with the ideas, how you judge the ideas, what you do afterward, all that stuff. This is what I'm trying to get at with Popper completeness and say, okay, you got to be able to compute, not one thing, but anything. Okay, so that's the Turing completeness. And then you want to be able to generate, not just a couple things, not just a subset of what's computable, but anything that you can compute, you can also generate the program to compute it. And then, okay, now that you have that, that's not enough because you can imagine a world where you can generate everything and you just keep on generating a bunch of BS and either slowing yourself down by generating everything and spending an ever decreasing portion of what you have available on all these little things, splitting up your resources, or by just doing one thing all the time, but it's never particularly good because you just take a bad idea and you build on that and you keep doing that forever. So you want to be able to constrain your search to the good stuff and build on the good things and keep on doing that, build on the good and the good and the good and the good. So what does that take? And so you need to be able to figure out what's good. But again, if you only have one way of doing that, one notion of what's good, then that's not going to be good enough because there's different notions of good for food and for theories of physics. You can't just bite on a theory and be like, oh, this tastes good, and therefore. So you need new criteria for new things, new decisions. So these are all the things where I think. I'm trying to kind of take your goal there, Zachary, of saying, okay, what is it that we care about in terms of open-endedness, and say, okay, I think there's like many, many things, and any capability that humans have, we could say we want that to be open-ended. Okay, that'll be great. But I think that you can reduce all of the human capabilities down to just those few things: what you can compute, what you can generate, and what you can use as criteria in deciding what's good or bad, or relevant or irrelevant. So the criteria for why you would control something, why you would make it very useful, or why you would use it or not use it. So I think there are only those three things. And so maybe you can push back and say, actually, you're missing one, or that other one is actually unnecessary.
No, I think that definitely covers it. I mean, I'm breaking down the knowledge discovery process as is laid out by David Deutsch, but I mean, just saying that you can generate anything covers the fact that you could generate something that you would consider a problem, or that you could generate something that you would consider a solution to the problem, or you could generate something that you would consider an alternative to that problem, or you can generate something that would be considered the selection, the criteria for selection. So I think the way that you've described it is comprehensive, compared to what I'm saying.
Yeah, and by the way, like you can generate an idea and then use it for multiple purposes. And so, if I say, hey, the rockets go to the moon, you could use that as the basis of thinking about, oh, what if rockets went to Mars? So you're using it in like a generative context. Or you could say, oh, I'm actually using this idea to criticize somebody else because they think that rockets can't go to the moon. And actually, this idea that rockets do go to the moon and have gone to the moon is a criticism of that, a counterexample, and on and on. So there are ideas and there are roles for the ideas or functions they can fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
Any other ideas?
What were the three things again? So there's like being Turing complete, then generating any idea, and then selecting good ideas. Is that?
Yeah, and I guess in particular, it's like you can use any idea as sort of the metric for deciding whether an idea is good or bad.
And you put that in the third thing category, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just a generalization of the idea of like Darwinian selection.
Right.
Yeah. In particular, it's like you don't have to like destroying something is only one means of controlling it, and like reducing its impact, and multiplying the number of instances of a thing is only again one means of increasing its impact. By the way, I think it's kind of fun to look at evolution in general, and a lot of what I'll do, for instance, is I'm rereading The Blind Watchmaker from Richard Dawkins, and the first time I read it, I remember thinking, this is more fun for me to read than books about AI, because I think that the problems of evolution and how that works, how genes arise and what happens to them, and how progress happens and what controls the speed of evolution and all that kind of thing, all those questions have their generalizations or different versions when you think about AGI and knowledge more generally. And you can say, okay, Darwin talked about variation and selection of genes. But what if you widened your perspective, not only to include genes, but like anything, like any program or any physical system? Okay, that's a generalization of that picture. Or what if the variations could be more than just change one letter of a thing? Okay, that's interesting. And what if the forms of selection that weren't just about sexual selection or, you die, go to get eaten? Like, what are other things that would achieve something similar? Like, what is it that is ultimately being achieved by selection? How does it affect what happens over the billions of years that evolution happens? What is it really doing? What is the core function of it? And then you kind of squint and you see, I think this is really what's happening. It's not about like destroying things. It's about controlling them, for instance. But anyway, this broader picture of looking at evolution and kind of trying to squint and see what is the more general form of that is very interesting.
I do have a question about this. Why in the three-pronged, the three things that you have there, why would the selection not just be a part of generating anything? Why is selection criteria, a specialized form of that?
Oh, I suppose it's not really the selection criteria then, which is fair enough. So it's one thing for you to have an idea exist, to generate it and it's there. It's another one to be able to use it, and not merely use it, but use it for a particular purpose. And so I could say, hey, this idea exists, but you can't touch it. You can't look at it. Or I could say it does exist and you can use it to like generate new ideas, but you cannot use it to judge any ideas.
Yep.
So in that case, it wouldn't be able to do this essential function. So really there's like, I like to say that like there's everything that's computable. That's like the big set of stuff that matters. And then we can talk about like how a human brain or an AGI is very powerful if it can relate to that set of everything, all the possible ideas, and everything computable. If it can relate to that thing in all these different ways, it can generate anything in that set, compute anything in that set, or use anything in that set to engage in further generation or the selection. Yeah.
So if I break it down and say that having alternatives is a specialized function of generating anything, and you could, for example, just generate more solutions to a problem, but never compare the solutions to each other. You can do any selection criteria for, saying that one is good and saying one is bad, but you can't compare the set of alternatives. So because you don't have that ability, if you didn't have that ability, it wouldn't be a effective way of, it wouldn't be an effective way of having AGI or of growing knowledge. So we should then consider having alternatives be a specialized function of AGI. How does that strike you?
I think I'm a little bit confused about the difference between like, okay, I generated some ideas, so I just think of it as we have novelty generation on the one hand, and we have like filtering on the other.
Mm-hmm.
And in any given situation, there's going to be specialized versions of that. Like in this context, we're going to approach the novelty and the filtering in some particular way. But ultimately, those are the two fundamental things that are happening. So at the core, most fundamental, most basic, they're just those two things: variation and selection to some degree. But yeah, I think it is interesting to kind of dig into each of them, and there are more things to say about them. But I think that I guess the big picture is clearest when looking at it in that way.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not seeing the selection. Yeah.
The way I think about it is like, there's more than this going on, but one of the big things is like you would just drown in all of your ideas if you couldn't like discard the ones that are not solving any problems, right? I can give you a random string of words. Technically speaking, that's an idea, but it's just not useful for anything. And I'm sure your brain's kind of coming up with these all the time, and they probably get filtered out even before you experience them, because there's probably like, consciousness is the tip of the iceberg kind of thing. So like the selection is, I think, a totally different thing than generating the ideas. And it's very load bearing in the sense that it's like totally required for AGI, because otherwise you would just be drowning in all these useless ideas, because like you rely on the fact that you can generate ideas that might be wrong, because the whole point is to generate any idea. So most of them are going to be wrong. So then if you can't discard the ones that are wrong, or to be more specific, don't solve any problems, then you just drown.
But by the way, I think
See, Salvador.
The one way to put things is so there are details that I think will sound awkward, that like, oh, if I'm saying there's just variation and selection, this seems to leave certain things out. I think that's fair enough. I think the most precise way to put things is something like there are really maybe the two most fundamental questions are: how do you create new ideas, and what happens to them once they have been created?
Right. I agree with that. But so I think there's a specialized thing here with what you consider to be an alternative idea is, I think, also a specialized thing. So in order to, if you select an idea, like saying that one is good or bad, usually you can cut off a large category of ideas, or like new ideas, and then whenever you have those variations that come up, you kind of have the automatic selection of they've already been dismissed from the category of ideas. You don't have to reselect every single time the ideas that you've already selected as being bad, or because you have a way of grouping them as being relevant or similar ideas. And I think that's a part of the considering a variation to be an alternative is like a grouping function here. That seems to be, I mean, I'm kind of stretching myself to consider it to be specialized, but I think it could be considered a specialized function. But if you could just generate novelty and you could do good selection, but you could not group the novelty in any way, you had no specialized way of grouping, or why you would consider one idea to be a variation of another idea. Why are they both solving the same problem? If you didn't have that categorization, you still would be kind of overrun by novelty in the same way.
So this is an area where you can then ask, or put it this way. So one thing that I like about setting up that very simple dichotomy of like, okay, how do you make the new ideas, and then what happens once you made them? So that's, I think, the simplest high-level question. But then both of those questions can get answered in different ways for different systems. That question will be answered, those two questions will be answered differently for machine learning or animals or AIs or whatever. Like all of these things are doing these core activities differently. And so what's good to do is to see, okay, these two questions do apply to everything where knowledge is being created. Then having acknowledged that simplicity and that uniformity, you then say, okay, but they're all different. Well, what makes them different now in each of these two sides of the coin? So then when it comes to humans, we do them in like a very advanced way, which you're kind of hitting upon here by looking at those more detailed questions, which is, when we generate new ideas, we're not doing that randomly. Which ideas we chose to mix up in our head is because of the problem that we're facing. Hey, I saw that I bumped my head. I'm going to think about things related to that, like heads and walls. I'm not going to think about whales. So there's a reason I came up with these new ideas and not those. Right. So that's part of it. There's also a lot of structure, that encodes a lot of structure about categories and groups and that sort of thing. And so because of that structure and because of the fact that I have this notion of relevance, both of those things together, this pre-existing structure and just the new situation, I'm combining those two things, the old and the new. I'm now getting a way better and more efficient next guess. So if you look at just like the quality of like what are the chances this next thing you've created is any good? They're very much higher now than when you just like tweak one letter out of a billion in a giraffe's genome. It's much less likely to be useful. And ditto, by the way, for criteria. Like if you have a zillion ways of judging things, most of them are going to be irrelevant and horrible. It's like imagine that like your grandma, great grandma, you're going to use her criteria for whatever to judge, anything other than maybe the meals that you're eating. Like maybe that would be okay, or the closest, most likely to be useful. Whereas like their views on technology and culture are probably going to be very outdated. And so even if you know what she thought about it, and you can execute those criteria, and you could write a novel that fully models what everybody in that time period was thinking, you wouldn't choose voluntarily to do that now because you'd be laughed out of the room. So you're going to want to have those ideas, but then choose when to use them and when not to. So if you made a poor choice in terms of which filters to use at any given moment, that's the case where it's like you did a great job coming up with the new idea. You're Einstein and you had the great new idea and the insight about the elevator and everything, but then you just judged it by your great grandma's criteria and you're like, oh yeah, this is not going to help me cook a good dish, and so fuck it. It's like, okay, there goes your Nobel Prize, whatever. So the generative side and the filtering side both are essential, and done in better and worse ways.
Yeah, I wonder if... Oh, please go on.
No, Zachary, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the addition of those nuances are what makes it more efficient and actually AGI, or if, as you're kind of alluding to, that the nuances don't really matter that much, beyond variation and selection. So I'm wondering if like having a specific difference of understanding what a problem is and then understanding what types of variations are, then understanding what alternatives to that variation are, if those differences are relevant, and then having the selection and then having what you consider to be progress after that selection, if that matters or not.
Yeah, the goal for me is to try to reduce as much as possible, like the number of things happening, and to say that minds are complicated, but certain aspects are simple. So let's try and find those, and then we have a better handle on the complexity that then follows. And so once you say, hey, like, I think there's no way around saying that, there's a question about how the new thing came about, and then what you did afterward, as far as that idea is concerned. I think that's a pretty sharp split. And I think that questions about one, you can easily distinguish from questions about the other. You can say, this is a generative question. This is this is a before question, before idea. This is an after idea question. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a helpful way of partitioning the space, because so many questions are, 10,000 things might seem relevant to them and they're connected to everything and everything's connected to everything. But hey, let's calm down and say, I think there is an even split here where we can carve up the space and make things a little easier. So that's the value of simplicity, hopefully, is that if you've made a good distinction, then now you can attack a smaller problem that's more manageable. So that's why I'm interested in kind of seeing like, okay, let's set aside some of these details for a second and see if there is a sharp a categorical difference between this generative side and then what happens afterward, the filtering. And then talk about the different kinds of each, and then how other processes might control both and participate across that thing. But I was going to say something else. I forgot. But yeah, I think you could. One thing you can say is that having done this, by the way, and then okay, I divided the world in two. There's before the idea, after the idea. Then what's kind of interesting is to say, to zoom in on each and ask what are the different kinds of each. And when it comes to control of ideas, what happens after them? This is where I think there's like two subspecies of that. One of them is sort of asking, how good is this idea? Is it true, for instance? That's one kind of question. Second, there's a kind of question of, is this even relevant? And that's a different question entirely. And so like you'll have many ideas in your head that are true, and a few of them are relevant at any given moment. And likewise, there could be other ideas that are not true, but highly relevant, and you should focus on them because they're almost right, and you should build on them. So these are two kinds of questions that come up when you ask, or like two types of criteria for saying, okay, I have the idea now. What should I do with it? One you can ask, is it any good? The other one is you can ask, is it relevant? And one way of distinguishing humans from other systems, especially biological evolution, which is also capable of progress, is saying, in the case of biological evolution, when some new thing happens, some new mutation arises, what then happens is it gets eaten or it doesn't. It gets caught, it has mates or it doesn't. You don't get this same ability to, I think, generate a potential idea and then, or how to put it, you don't have the same kind of control over ideas. So one way of putting it is like with humans, we have this new kind of attention that lets us say, I'm not just going to like vary things and create variations and then test them out at random. I'm going to choose which things I vary. So I have these, So if you look at like genes, here's another way of another angle on it. You can ask what kinds of control mechanisms happen with genes. And the biggest one is called like gene regulation and transcription. So you have the genes in the genome, but they don't do anything while they're in the genome. They have to be transcribed into RNA to make proteins and do other things. So this is the equivalent of like reading your hard drive. Just because it's on the hard drive doesn't mean it's being used by anything. You have to have a program read it and put it into memory and begin using it. And so that happens in the cell as well. The genome is the hard drive. The RNA is sort of what the program reading it. And different cells in different places of the body will read the genome in different ways. They'll look at these genes and ignore those. And so they're reading the hard drive in different ways, despite the fact every cell has the same hard drive. And some of these things, they not only like get read and turned into RNA, they like hook back into the DNA and cause other parts to be read. And these are called like transcription factors. And so like some of the parts of the gene are like turning on other parts. And this is happening in like long sequences and crazy things. So you're seeing here that there's like this sophisticated machinery that says, hey, I have all this information. And it doesn't just get activated randomly. Like there's specific things it's doing to control itself. So that's super interesting. And one interesting question is to ask, okay, how does that process map onto what we talked about with like the brain and like knowledge creation in general? Like, is there any novelty happening there? Is there any control happening? And the answer is actually there's no novelty. Like it will generate, it'll turn something on, but it won't change it. Like the genome doesn't change itself unless some kind of virus comes in and starts messing things up. So that's interesting. So there's control, but there's no control of novelty.
Right.
So that's interesting. And ditto for criteria, like even if there was like some new mutation that arose there, like the system wouldn't say, oh, let's test that out now and let's check it and see if it's right. It's like, no. Like if there's a mutation there, we're doing it and we're going to get eaten or we're not, but we're not going to be able to check it and say like apply any particular test to it.
It doesn't even know what to test it. Like it doesn't know what the original was to test it against it. Right? So it doesn't have the idea that it is an alternative, a variation of a different sequence. Yeah.
And I don't know how clear it was to kind of like go through that half-remembered biology stuff, but the more general point is that you can kind of look back at things from genetic evolution and say, hey, how does this idea we're discussing apply there? And does it apply there? And how, and in particular, like what is the difference between humans and biological evolution? Like, what are we doing that is better? Because it seems like we're doing something better. We're going to the moon and it never did. But why? What are we doing that's more powerful? And so, and then in that framework of saying, hey, there are only two questions ultimately: how the novelty happens and how the control happens once you have the idea. Okay, and then you just take those two questions and you carry them on down to genetic evolution and say, hey, let's ask those two questions there. And maybe there are other domains, by the way, that you could do that, like in programming or other things, and in machine learning, obviously. And I like to call that comparative epistemology in general. Take some system that can generate knowledge and just say, hey, every question you have about knowledge creation, apply it there too, and see how all these things stack up against each other.
Something I find interesting that I wonder if you guys agree or disagree with is like, so when I'm hearing you guys talk, there's almost like equal emphasis given to like the generation part, or maybe say the problem detection part, versus the coming up with a solution and detecting a good solution part, right? Like the generation and selection. Whereas for me, I feel like the problem detection part comes a lot easier than the solution detection part. It's actually one of the reasons I like Popperian epistemology so much is that it like talks about this issue, which like, if you're an animal, like you're hungry, like the problems are there, like you're too hot or too cold, or you have a headache or whatever is bothering you. Like I feel like by just having some kind of detection mechanism for like, hey, are all the programs or devices, quote unquote devices, running as intended? And if not, like just sound an alarm. That kind of like gets you the like problem. Oh, there's some problem with my legs or whatever. Like maybe I stuck a thorn. And so I don't know. I feel like it's the thing I'm trying to get at is like, do you guys also feel like the problem detecting the problems to work on is easier than detecting the solutions to your, like detecting the good solutions from the solutions you're coming up with those to solve those problems? Or if you think that detecting the right problem is also just as difficult and subtle as coming up with the solutions?
I think the criteria for it is all open-ended. So I'd say that finding a problem it sometimes is very like complicated and very nuanced, right? Like looking at a screen of looking at a shadow from two slits and determining that that's a problem that needs a solution that is like the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics, right? That to even notice that as a problem is pretty like that requires a lot of nuance and a lot of prerequisite knowledge and whatever. So that could be very complicated, I think, and that's open-ended in what you consider to be a problem. And then the same for what you consider to be a solution. I think that is open-ended also, and there are many different types of criteria, and hopefully that criteria is being refined as we all progress in our society and so on. And then, how we notice what progress is even on top of that. I think that's all open-ended in our criteria for identifying that.
Yeah. With the example you just used, I think it's interesting because like I would say, arguing my point, that like there's no controversy that there's like a problem with the double slit experiment that classical physics just cannot explain, right? But there is a bunch of controversy about what the solution is.
Well, when you say no controversy, you mean no controversy among educated physicists, right? Like ask a regular person, like, look at this, look at this image, and what I really did was I threw one
Sure.
photon. Like, they're like, what are you even talking about? Why do you care about this at all?
Right. Okay,
That's
I guess I see what you mean.
This is not a problem in any sense to a regular, for most regular people, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and the more general or maybe even simpler version of that is saying like, "Hey, I did this magic trick," and you impress an adult, and then you show the same to the baby, and they're just nodding their head.
Right.
Right. Right.
Hmm. I I think okay, so then I would have to make a caveat about like missing requisite knowledge.
Hmm.
But I don't know, I do still think that detecting problems seems to come easier than detecting good solutions. Because
Hmm.
like let's say I grant you that okay, among educated not physicists but like people who are a little bit physics nerds, right? There is no then controversy about okay that this is a problem and it requires a solution, but there's like so much controversy about okay what is the solution, and for a bunch of people like I'm assuming all three of us like okay it's clicked that okay many worlds basically solves this problem by and large, um, but for a lot of other people they're like no it has not clicked in the same way. So like um, anyway, I guess I don't know. I'm not sure
Well,
where I'm going with this. I'm just
I think I
No,
had
but
one
yeah,
thing,
okay, go on. Yeah, sorry,
which is that it's always trivial to say some idea is wrong or to guess that it can be improved.
yeah.
However, that's not what anybody cares about because you can say about anything, even the baby can say it. That's not substantive. So what you actually want is a specific sense of like, this is wrong in this way. And if you were to change it in that sense, I would like it more. Um, and so that's very sophisticated. Yeah. And so, yeah, we could all look at a situation. And if you think that you could look at the double slit result and say, oh, that's problematic. Doesn't make sense. I'm going to ignore it or whatever. Or you could just say, it's boring to me. Yeah, it's a problem that you showed
Right.
me because it doesn't matter. Or it's ugly, or just ugly. But of course, those problems aren't the ones that are going to get you the Nobel. So it's something else entirely. You say, oh, that does not fit with my existing classical theory at all. And that's a huge deal because that theory is supposed to apply to everything. Let's work out what's going on there. But by the way, so I think it's one thing to say it is open-ended. It does depend on knowledge. And because knowledge growth is open-ended, the problems that are going to be interesting in a trillion years are not going to be the ones today. And so to recognize such a problem, you would need the intervening trillion years of knowledge. So that seems like a pretty incontrovertible fact. One thing, though, like in favor of this idea that problem detection is easier, not that I think that's necessarily true, but like I know that there's like a quote in The Open Society and Its Enemies that it opens with saying like, who do we have here?
Hello.
La 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 la. But,
can you actually hear me?
Yeah, it's Derek. What's up?
Yeah.
I thought we had a terrorist that appeared with this la 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 name. I thought, okay,
No, it's the name of my mom's speaker actually speaks the name of the phone when you connect to it. So I like to give it funny names, and it says it will say something like connected.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm in the gym. I thought I would listen in.
Cool.
So do go on, talk about epistemology.
We'll try. I actually talked about the gym earlier. Not that I was able to find a good connection to epistemology, but what was I saying? Can anyone remind me?
Yeah, you were thinking about that, going with the idea that it might be easier to detect problems, and then you're talking about Popper's idea in.
I think it's like a quote from like Pericles or something. Maybe I forget where he says, "Though few can originate a policy, many can critique it." Something like a better phrasing. Right. But I think that's a little bit misleading in this case, as far as like finding problems versus solving them, because I think it's there's a difference between like saying to notice that there is a problem of some kind is to say that like, oh, I have found a conflict, but so you only have to do one, see one kind of problem. Whereas to solve a problem, you're usually trying to meet like many criteria. So like if you have a car part and like you're an engineer and like it doesn't fit because it's grinding against some particular thing, you say, there's a problem. It's hitting that one thing. But then when you go away and you redesign it and you come back, it still has to meet that problem, but also everything else. Otherwise, you just shifted it over and now it conflicts with everything else. So that's not good enough. So there's a certain thing to be said there. But even aside from that, again, like you could be the only person in the world who has a particular idea that makes a certain observation seem weird. And you go like, everybody else thought that was normal, but it's something about that rubs me the wrong way. And you're the only one that knows that.
I'm also thinking about older solutions to problems, and the fact that Ali, the way that you're thinking about it now, the resolution of a problem, the solution has a particular effect. Like you're thinking that it solves a problem, it resolves it in some way, and it can maybe transform the world in a certain way, and blah blah blah. But I'm thinking historically, when people created solutions to their problems, they didn't actually have that criteria met. So the criteria of what they considered to be a solution was totally different from your criteria for what you consider to be a solution today. The criteria for solutions were just like it conforms to some story told in religion or something like that. I'm trying to make up a random. So there's something interesting about that too. But I think that there's the asymmetry there because you do have probably a more strict criteria for what considers to be a solution than what you would consider to be a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny that you phrase it that way, because I would almost say that back then they had a like looking for problem where they're like, oh, thunder's happening or whatever. I need, this is a problem. I don't know how this works. Okay, whatever. Thor did it, and that's a good solution. I guess. Okay, so then becomes a criteria thing because it's a good solution by some bad criteria, and then they don't have the sense or the sophistication or whatever to be like, oh, it's another problem that I don't know where Thor comes from or how his hammer works, and it just doesn't occur to them because it's like not relevant to their day-to-day lives. Anyway, but it's but you're right. I think it is like you can also totally frame that phenomenon as like they just were coming up with solutions that weren't actually good, but they were nonetheless satisfied because their criteria for solutions were bad. But anyway, I think we're going down a rabbit hole here a little bit.
Well, it's interesting. I'm curious to think. I mean, what more like what makes you think about this asymmetry between creating or seeing problems and creating solutions?
I guess the reason I bring it up is, I don't know, like as even earlier in the conversation, like these days I've just been thinking about, okay, what it really, to me, it seems like this is like a crucial missing piece that we have, maybe we have all the parts to discover, but we just haven't figured it out, which is like problem detection is almost, I would even use the word automatic, where like, you know, you just get hungry, you get irritated, you get whatever, and so you have problems. But detecting a solution, or rather, and then the second part, coming up with solutions is also easy. Like I kind of, maybe I'm wrong in this and being overly optimistic or something, but I view LLMs as like they will come up with any sentence. So like, you know, we're kind of off to a good start here. And now to just like kind of close the loop, so to speak, if we could only figure out, like in engineering, there's this concept called beam search, where like you have multiple different outputs that you're working on at the same time, and you like remove the bad ones and you keep the good ones. Basically, if we could just do this kind of quote unquote at scale, where we have, you know, all these hypotheses that the LLMs are producing, and we could just like, again, just use an LLM to somehow be like, hey, detect the good ones or the bad ones. I feel like it would be like, okay, then it can, then I don't see anything stopping it from creating new good explanations for stuff, right?
Yeah.
It would need to observe, get data from the real world, but yeah.
But so here's where we come back to this fundamental idea of like this proper completeness thing, which is my attempt to try to get at what is it that makes the difference between something which in practice can like go to the moon versus not. And so as we kind of talk about this, I want to kind of reinsert that concept and work with it and see what happens. I think the most general thing, by the way, even setting that concept aside, is to say there are really only like 2 or 3 things that apply to like every search process. One of them being like, what is the space that you can search? Okay. Like, what is the quality of the thing that of a particular thing in that space that you might have found? And then what kind of paths do you take through that space? Any system which could, in theory, explore an infinity of space, everything that's possible. That's great. But suppose that it actually just never explored anything. It could, but it just stays still. Okay, well, that system obviously sucks. What about a system that can explore very widely and does explore very widely, but is somehow has a limit on how far it can go? Okay, that also sucks. So what you want is this sort of, okay, you can definitely discover anything. Okay, that's great. That's what you want. But also, we don't want you to, in practice, do nothing. We also don't want you to, in practice, only stay in a certain space or go into a loop that's finite. What we actually want you to do is explore the space. But also, we don't, so that's good. But also, we don't want you exploring everything because most things suck and would waste your time and resources and maybe kill you. So don't do that. So what you want is a system that is sort of between the like do nothing system and the do everything system. You want it to be like the do some things system. And so now which some things, that's where all the details are.
Right. That's the heart of the problem. Yeah.
And so so if you again zoom out, you'd say, okay, first, I want universality. I want the ability to reach any point in the space. Secondly, I want to take efficient paths to the good things. And so now when you look at LLMs or biological evolution, you could say, question number 1, how far can you go? Can you go everywhere? Can you reach everything? Biological evolution can't reach certain things, arguably, because like it requires taking some jumps where in the middle of the jump would kill you. And so you can't just a smooth path.
Sorry to interrupt, but so are you satisfied with simply the fact that because they're sampling from the tokens at the end of the day and they can produce any string of tokens, that they can go anywhere in idea space? Like, does that seem like check and moving on to you, or you're not satisfied?
Yes. And also even simpler systems could do it. A random bit string generator connected to a Turing machine where you just plug in those bits into the Turing tape. That also works.
Right.
So that example in particular shows you that gets you almost nothing, because if you need it, that gives you a sort of universality of result in a way. Like you can get to any point, any program. Right. You can get there. But of course, most of us are bad. So that's not really the ultimately what matters. Yeah. That's only the step 1.
Mm-hmm.
Step 1 can do anything. That's great. But okay, the baby can do anything, but does it become a pilot or a murderer? Like, okay, or both. You know?
Yeah.
So that's the question. But once you have that picture, which I think of as first the reach of it, which is like the size of the circle of things it can reach. That's question number 1. You want that to be Turing complete. You want everything is reachable. But then secondly, you want to like imagine the sort of the path, the tree diagram of all the stuff that you try along the way. Is it a single point where you do nothing? Is it does it totally fill the space because you try to do everything and that very inefficient? Or did you take like a very arbitrary zigzag path that took forever to find any good points? Or did you take this sort of mildly branching tree that's pretty darn quick to getting to a really good point, and that's what you want. So you can almost visualize different systems as how wide is their circle, and how branchy is their tree.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those you can use as pickup lines. But yeah, for researchers of machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I think that very general picture, which I like to think of almost as like, how far can you go and how fast or efficiently can you go, is sort of the universal measures of a knowledge generating, progress making system. And so when you look at LLMs, you could say, okay, hey, I think that they can reach anywhere. Okay, that you do need that. And if you didn't have that, that would be bad. But okay, now that you have that, the question is, how branchy is the tree? And, one aspect of making the tree less branchy and more efficient is that you can sort of exploit signals and useful bits of information. Like, everybody might have missed this, but I just saw that little tingle in the corner of my eye that I think there's something over there. And because I somehow strikes me in a certain way, I'm going to actually act on that. And so that's just a little signal that you could easily have missed, that maybe, an animal has a slightly bad camouflage. And so the tiger latches onto that. So that was the thing that was out there to be noticed, if you have skills. But you may not have the skills.
Just to throw a thought out there, I think in terms of making the tree more branchy, there's like one way, I think this is maybe exactly what you were saying, but like one way to make the tree more branchy is like just remove the branches that violate existing knowledge. So for us, it would be like discarding a theory that violates conservation of energy. For an LLM, it clearly has this thing of like, maybe during the forward pass, whatever process comes up with stuff that violates rules of grammar, like that never makes it out, right? It's always like perfectly grammatically correct strings that make it out. So I think this...
Not strictly true, I guess, but that may not affect your point.
Yeah, maybe not strictly true in the sense that, it's always like any string has non-zero probability at the end of the day.
Also, many strings in the training set are just, other types of things besides grammatical text.
Oh, right. Sure, yeah. I just mean like if you ask it to write prose, it'll unless you just say like, hey, in fact, this is something I'll try later. By the way, it really does struggle with like going against the training data. I've been doing these fun experiments where if you ask it to generate an image of a horse riding an astronaut on the moon, it doesn't really work. Like it'll make an astronaut riding a horse, then you have to like go through the whole process. And eventually it does get there, but it's still like, it's a real struggle. Anyway, so I wonder if that'll apply to like, hey, say give me an answer that's like grammatically incorrect. I wonder if it'll just be like, I can't. It's too ingrained. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is like, there's this thing of like, don't violate existing knowledge, which we do and the LLMs do. But then there's, this like other thing about making the tree more branchy, which is like, if you find something that is like not an idea that was being giving a lot of attention, but you can detect that it has some potential to then focus resources on that idea. But do it in a way that keeps the balance intact and like doesn't end up killing you for some reason because you end up focusing on the idea and it ends up being bad. Or like, eventually you cut your losses.
Yeah. So one of the things, by the way, when I was thinking of branchy, it's maybe more like you just reducing the amount of material of the tree is, you want to be more efficient. And so the more branchy, arguably the worst, or, you want to have thinner branches. Yeah. I don't know if it all works, but as an analogy. So going back to that Popper completeness idea, and thinking about how that applies, and this idea of how far can you go, how efficiently can you get there, how big is the circle, how long is the path you're tracing as you search. Those are like the two North Stars, the two key concepts that apply to everything. So one kind of question is there any discrete difference, any categorical difference between systems that are doing this stuff? Like, I think there's a pretty big difference between a system that can only do a finite number of things and one that can do an infinite number of things. It's, Turing complete or Turing incomplete. So as far as the size of your circle, that seems like there's a categorical difference between certain kinds of systems. But what about the paths that you take in that space of possibilities? Are there any categorical differences between humans, how humans search that space, or evolution, or AI, LLMs, and all that? So that's one kind of question. I think that there is, or that there can be. It's not just that one of them is a little bit jankier than the other. I think that one fundamental difference can be what I like to call process universality. So like the types of steps you can take any form. Mm-hmm. So I mean, in practice, it could look like most of your steps look like very simple, but like you could do other kinds of things. And in fact, that's what happens with humans, in evolutionary, our ancestors were doing pretty simple things, but they could do quite different things in terms of how they spoke and searched the space of ideas. And just to clarify that, I think of that as being sort of different from a different idea of like product universality, or like what you can reach, like the results, the outcome of the process. That's kind of like where you can go.
They are related though, right? Because in biological evolution, each one has to be viable. I think this is what you're getting at, right? Like part of it, like each variation has to be viable variation in biological evolution, but in human thought, not every thought has to be a viable thought, and you can jump a lot more. Is that what you're getting at with the process?
That's part of it, yeah. Okay. Yeah, in that case, it's specifically about, and the processes here are both about like the generative side and mm-hmm. the control side. And so in that case, it's about the control, where you'd say, okay, like if you can sort of control your ideas in any way, that can include, does it survive in practice, or it's just kind of interesting.
Right.
I can do both. I don't have to throw it away just because it doesn't work right now, which evolution would have to do that.
Right.
So you have an extra option there. And not only that extra one option, but an infinity of possible ways of judging the situation. And I'll keep that idea for this reason that I just invented. Mm-hmm. And evolution can't do that. But yeah, so again, the difference, the two ideas to distinguish between here, talking about this sort of types of universality is one of them, product universality, like what you can reach. That's all the different points of the space. If you can reach any point, you have this sort of product universality. That's kind of what I call it in my little notes. And then the other one is process universality, the kinds of steps you can take between the points in the space. And so I think a system could have that quality, these qualities, or lack them. And you could have one and not have the other. But I think that's one way of saying, okay, hey, like LLMs have they could have a huge number of very sophisticated ways of taking steps in that space, but still not quite have the universality. So that sort of at some point you're going to see like they're not quite making the right decisions anymore, because they're not quite able to take this new idea and apply it flexibly the way the human can. This is like at some point where like the human and the LLM behavior are sort of tracking each other. And if there were two lines on a graph, they might be sort of on top of each other. But then at some point they start to diverge, and the humans are kind of still tracking the ideas in our usual way, and the conversation has moved on, and we're still making new decisions with new ideas in a good way. The LLMs are kind of left behind where they were first trained or something. They're not quite following the conversation anymore.
But I like the distinction. I like the idea that the biological evolution does not have this process universality. And I guess to answer the question that you had initially is there a difference between the process of evolution and a person and an AGI? I would think just that the process, as you're saying, is open-ended. So like you could do anything, and I guess you probably couldn't get any. I don't know. There might be some similarity or overlap with how various people think about different things, and then how various people over time think about things. Or it might just be completely open-ended, and there's no way to really predict anything by being able to see the shape of their progressing through the space of ideas.
By the way, when you I mentioned earlier that I like this term comparative epistemology, comparing different knowledge creating systems. This is very common when you compare people to each other, or businesses to each other, or machine learning models to each other. Everybody's doing that in a particular field because you kind of have to if you want to sell your product or whatever. But yeah, where things get a little bit wilder is when you try to go across domains and be like, okay, let's compare people to machines, to evolution. And I think that kind of blows the thing open a bit. And you kind of need these more general criteria in order to make sense across fields, because the criteria that we generally apply to LLMs, like benchmarks and so on, like no human even has like the attention span to like take one of those to the extent that take you 1,000 man years to do that. Yeah. But
someone's got to do it so that we can get the human equivalent line to see when the LLM's passing it.
Have you tried those apps that where you try to predict the tokens yourself?
Yeah, I tried it just a couple times, and I was horrible at it. Obviously.
Could you describe? Could you explain what that means? I'm not really understanding.
Yeah.
Someone just basically makes webs. I think there's probably more than one of these now, where to just see how hard a language model's job is, it'll pick a random piece from some data set and then give you the token so far and then ask you to predict the next one. And you can just see how good you are at like...
Are you just like guessing the next word, or are you doing matrix multiplication to...
Okay. No. You're just guessing the next word and see how often you can get it right.
You want to try it now? I'll give you one just off the top of my head.
Okay.
There are many
problems. People.
Goats. Next. Now try again. Given that context. Correct. Correct.
Yard.
Forest.
Okay.
But
period.
But it's kind of interesting because you see one of the things I noticed doing that is that you can you're kind of close, like you kind of seen the right category, and to a human you'd say like, okay, you get points for getting the category right, but the LLM is just like 0 points, no partial credit.
Yes, right. which is why it only works at these large scales and not at small scales, because like that ends up being fatal.
And it is fun. Like I think it's fun for about as long as we did it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And as soon as you go beyond that, you're like, this is torture. This is like, and I think in a way, like it's not necessarily a watertight knockdown argument, but when you try this activity and find that it is deeply anti-human, I think this begins to give you a visceral feeling that LLMs aren't doing human activity. But then again, I don't know. Like it is interesting.
All right, I think I have to head off soon as well.
Cool. Well, can we wrap it up there? And thanks for joining, you guys, as always.
Thank you for hosting, Carlos. Really appreciate it.
It's always super fun. Bye, guys.
See ya.